I am a forest ranger, and I cover one of the largest national parks in the United States. I cannot give you my station's name for obvious reasons. Quick backstory. I was recruited out of college by one of my professors who retired from the parks and worked part-time as an econ teacher at my college. He was a great man, but passed away a few years ago to cancer, unfortunately. I have been working at this location for about 4 years, but overall 9 years in other locations. Like I said, I have been here for 4 years, but I still see and hear things that surprise me every day. For starters, this place is odd. It's unlike any forest I've ever encountered in my career. The forest has a perpetual, yet almost paranormal, thick fog. Once you leave the forest grounds, the sky clears for the most part. It's like an invisible boundary. This fog makes it very difficult to navigate, and if you are new to the area, you are bound to get lost. It's very strange. Another thing that is strange is instead of using standard weapons, we carry a heavy arsenal in our station. These aren't your typical rifles, but rather military-grade fully automatic weapons. I have never seen this ever at any Forest Service station. I am told that the head ranger was good friends with a guy in the army, and because of that, we got the hookup. Another excuse I've heard for these kind of weapons is that there is a lot of poaching in the forest. We have a lot of endangered animals in the forest and we need to protect them. But I don't know. Other forests I was stationed at, we typically just enforce this with heavy fines. But every place is different. Another thing that is very strange is that there is a highway-like road that goes through the part of the forest but doesn't exit, meaning that it leads somewhere in the forest. Now here's the weird part. Only people with military authorization are allowed to use this road. Forest rangers and other personnel are not allowed to use the road or even walk adjacent to it to see where it leads. Even talking about the road will lead you to being reassigned or terminated. Another thing that's weird about this forest is that there is a third-party company that is in charge of taking care of any missing persons case inside the forest. This company doesn't even have a name, not even a logo that's associated with. We just call them on a special telephone that we have in our chief ranger's office. Needless to say, we're kept pretty busy throughout the year, helping campers find their campsites, catching illegal fishermen and hunters, you know, the usual. The strangest and somewhat terrifying thing about all of this is that no ranger is allowed out of the forest past 8 a.m. or before 6 a.m. I have no explanation why this rule is in place, but it makes me and other rangers uneasy. It's as if something's out there and we need to protect ourselves during the night. Now that I've covered the backstory, let me tell you about my terrifying experience. It was Tuesday, around 6:30 a.m. The sun had yet to rise and the visibility was near non-existent. I was on a back trail with my four-wheeler, driving slowly not to wake any nearby campers that were sleeping. I have my four-wheeler lights on, plus a heavy-duty headlight I like to wear when I'm driving. This helps me see through the thick fog. Mornings are typically quiet, due to the sun not being able to reach through the forest fog until about 8 a.m., but this morning was deathly quiet. There were no noises being made by any animals of any kind. No birds chirping, bugs buzzing. I didn't pay much attention to this since the low hum of the four-wheeler drowned out the silence. The lights on my four-wheeler then came across a campsite that instantly disturbed me. The campsite looked like a crime scene. The tent was shredded and blood covered the tent. The campsite was utterly destroyed. It looked like a bear had dragged someone across the campsite while bleeding everywhere. I didn't find any bodies. Other than the blood, there were no remnants of anyone. Technically, this event would be considered a missing persons case, and the third-party company would investigate. I was about to call it in, but I was perplexed by the situation. I had never seen so much blood before. I couldn't help but think that whatever creature did this was still here. That's when I noticed how quiet it was outside. I felt exposed. I went back to my four-wheeler and tore off in the direction of the main station, not caring about waking any of the other campers. I reached back in record time and called in the situation to the third-party company. They came quickly and immediately quarantined the campsite and any nearby campsites. They were in hazmat suits, Some of them were holding machine guns and making sure that no one could see what was going on. I was interviewed and told that what had happened was a pack of wolves had gotten hold of some campers that left out some food. This was interesting. I had worked here for 4 years and never seen or heard any wolves before. I had seen mountain lions and bears, but never wolves. By the time the interview had ended, it was 8:17 a.m. and the campsite was cleaned up. The other rangers were coming in from checking their respective sectors and asked me what had happened. I told them I couldn't say and not to worry about it. They seemed spooked since they could tell I was still recovering from seeing that horrific sight only hours before. This had been the first time I'd stumbled across anything like this in this forest. Apparently, the third-party company didn't seem fazed and it looked like business as usual for them. As I said before, the company was unnamed and didn't have any logos, so I couldn't tell you what the name of the company was. We would see them roughly once a week or so, investigating or cleaning up campsites. Again, this was unique to this forest and this forest alone. At 9 a.m., we all met for a morning meeting. The chief ranger exited his office with the man that interviewed me and met us all out in the meeting area. The man that interviewed me spoke first. He didn't identify himself or who he was with, but thanked us for our cooperation and that new measures were going to be in place. The first being that curfew was now from 6 p.m. till 9 a.m., also that no one was allowed in or out of the campgrounds. If anyone tried to leave, that they were to be escorted back to their campsites until the investigation had ended. If they refused, then we had the legal right to detain them and place them inside our holding cells. Another change was that once curfew began, that we were to take turns guarding the perimeter of the ranger station, using lethal force against, and I quote, any creatures. The man was not specific as to what kind. I think this was by design. He then thanked us for our cooperation and left. The chief ranger then spoke and reconfirmed everything the man had said earlier. He made it clear that we were not to be alone and not to be out past curfew. The rest of the day was complete chaos. Most, if not all, campers were trying to leave the campgrounds. We had to escort them back to their campsites, save a handful of them that we ended up detaining. They had been spooked by the investigation and caught wind of what had happened. They all wanted to leave, and for that, I don't blame them. I did find it odd that we had to detain people from leaving the campgrounds. I can see why we wouldn't let in new campers, but not to let them out? That seemed kind of wrong. Throughout the day, we received reports of large wolves around the campsites. I took a couple of rangers with me out to the areas where the reports were called in from. We were armed with the fully automatic weapons and began looking for the wolves in the dense woods that were covered with the fog. The fog was thick and made any visibility near impossible. We did see a couple of tracks, but they were inconsistent. They would start off as wolf prints, but then gradually change into hooves of some kind. My theory was that the hoof prints were older and harder, and it looked like the prints were changing, but were just old prints that hadn't rubbed away yet. It didn't make perfect sense, but that's what I went with. While looking for the wolves, we came across a figure standing in one of the paths. It looked like a young girl. She looked ill. Our visibility wasn't great, but it was clear that she was disoriented. Her hair was messy and had twigs in it. Her limbs looked bruised and broken. One of the junior rangers went over to assist, but she walked off the path away from us. The junior ranger followed her, assuming that she was scared of us since we had guns and that we were strangers to her. The ranger set aside his gun to comfort her and continued walking towards her. Suddenly, we heard a shriek coming from deep inside the forest, away from the girl. We all looked in the other direction, only for a moment, and looked back. The junior ranger was now nowhere in sight. "What the hell?" I said out loud. I readied it out to the ranger, but no reply. I walked over to where he was last seen and picked up his gun. I kept within the sight of the other rangers, not daring to go further. Well, he knows his way back," I said. I walked back to the path, and I took the other rangers back to the ranger station. We get back to the station, and surprisingly enough, it's 5 p.m. Where did the time go? I wondered. I hope the junior ranger makes it back before curfew. It's only an hour away. The handful of rangers went inside, and we got ready for curfew. We have rangers ready, standing on the balcony with spotlights and machine guns. Again, we aren't exactly sure what we're looking for, but we're told to shoot any creature within sight. I glance at my watch every 5 minutes or so, waiting on the junior ranger to arrive until 6 p.m. rolls around. We get inside the station, and I begin to worry what will happen over the night with the campers and rangers stuck outside. During the night, I am given the shift 2 to 4 in the morning to stand guard on the ranger station. I am accompanied with a fellow ranger named Gabe. He has been at the station for roughly the same amount of time I have been. We were well acquainted, and even hung outside of work a couple of times. Needless to say that my shift was somewhat enjoyable, minus the fact that we were somewhat terrified of being outside on watch. Again, we did not know what we were looking for. Nothing happened the first hour. I worked the spotlight, and Gabe kept his aim with his weapon. We probably enjoyed ourselves too much and were distracted when we heard rustling in the woods not too far from the station. I aimed the spotlight in the woods and saw the silhouette of a very large animal. The eyes were reflecting an eerie green color that looked haunting. The animal looked like a wolf, but with the mass of a bear. We were surprisingly not too concerned since we were safe from harm being on top of the station. Gabe took aim and shot twice, once clearly hitting the animal. Nothing happened. Gabe chuckled a nervous laugh. "I did hit that thing, right?" I agreed, and Gabe fired again, but to the same effect. Finally, Gabe just let it rip and went full auto on the animal. By this time, more rangers emerged on top of the station. They were obviously trying to see what we were shooting at. Once Gabe finished the clip, the animal finally sprinted off, but to our horror, on only 2 legs. You could hear the other rangers gasp in terror at the ungodly sight of this unknown beast. By this time, all the rangers were talking and theorizing what we were looking at. After 15 minutes in the cold evening air, all the excitement died down and we were left to finish our shift with only Gabe and I. By the time we were done with our shift, the other rangers seemed worked up. Word had gone around about the creature in the woods. I tried to get as much sleep as I could before 9 a.m., but to no avail. 9 a.m. came around and the curfew was lifted. The rangers were able to start their duties in the forest, although hesitantly. Most rangers either saw or heard the events last night, and they didn't want to meet the seemingly bulletproof werewolf. I was worried about the junior ranger that went missing yesterday, and I made sure to keep my eyes peeled while servicing the forest. I gathered a group of 6 rangers, and we loaded our guns on our 4-wheelers and took off into the endless forest that surrounded us. We didn't have to drive very far to see that the creature made very easy prey of the campers that were forced to stay quarantined in the forest. The first campsite we reached had a camping trailer turned over. The campsite was destroyed. I jumped off my 4-wheeler and readied my weapon. Other rangers followed me as we investigated the campsite for anyone that was hurt or needed medical attention. This campsite had a lingering odor that I can only describe as rotting meat. It was horrific and led me to believe that whoever was staying here was definitely dead. The site was covered in blood, and the trail that led out looked like someone was being dragged. After a brief search of the campsite, we saw that no one was there. I decided that it wasn't safe for us to be out and we should return back to the station. As I was walking back to my 4-wheeler, we all heard the sound of a screaming person, but it sounded so wrong. Have you ever tried to scream underwater? That's what it kind of sounded like at first, but it was accompanied with the sound of radio static. All of our attention was drawn towards the area where the sound was coming from, and to our horror, we saw what looked like 3 figures standing off in the fog of the forest. They were all obscured by the fog, but we were able to see what looked like antlers on people. What? The screams continued. Rather than investigate to see if the people were okay, I made the decision to take everyone back to the station for safety. I hopped on my 4-wheeler and drove back with my fellow rangers, with the screams of the people fading in the forest. That is, until the screams were getting louder. We were being chased by these things, and they were gaining on us. I was going full throttle, and yet these creatures made ground. At one point, I could hear footsteps of something heavy making its way behind me. I was the second to last rider in our group, and for a brief moment, I swear I could hear something heavily breathing behind me. A part of me wanted to look, but I knew if I looked, I would definitely die. The fear and curiosity was on the forefront of my mind, but I was too terrified to look. Finally, we were able to see what looked like the station just a couple of meters off the trail. By this time, the screams and sounds had stopped. We pulled into the station, and I was able to see that the ranger behind me was missing. The ranger either went another way, or something grabbed him out there. Something was actively picking off the rangers. Something is eating the campers in the campground. It seems that all we can do is try to survive, whatever creatures were in the forest. We call in the trashed campsite to the third-party company, and we report the missing ranger. The chief ranger now catches wind of the two missing rangers and seems spooked. The company comes in as usual and pulls in with a full hazmat team, as well as a full-suited SWAT team that are wearing gas masks. The head guy from the company calls an impromptu meeting with all the staff and rangers on the campgrounds. The meeting is brief, and hardly no information is shared about what is going on, or what the creatures were. He then tells us that we are no longer allowed outside. We were to defend the ranger station at all costs. This meant that we were not allowed to open the doors to anyone unless it was him or another high-ranking military personnel who should be there in about 3 days. Essentially, we were being quarantined inside the ranger station for 3 days until the military is able to come and relieve us of the station. The man leaves and the chief ranger says a few words before the meeting ends. Look guys, this is not the first time something like this has happened. This is all pretty standard and we will get through this as long as we stay together and stay outside of the fog. The people that you see in the fog are no longer people. Don't be fooled if they try to speak to you. Shoot anything that won't come inside the spotlight. They hate the light. What? What was going on? What the hell does that even mean? I thought to myself. What did he mean by, they aren't people anymore? What was the thing that was out in the woods? What is going on with the people in the campsites? Why am I not getting any answers? The rest of the day, all of the rangers are posted up inside the station. Their weapons are pointed at the reinforced barriers on the doors and windows. The company cleaning up the sites began using flamethrowers on the crime scenes inside the campgrounds. I was able to see this since I was posted on the roof again with Ranger Gabe. It was clear that whatever was making these messes, they wanted to remove any evidence of it being alive. Night came quickly, mainly because we were all dreading it, and this made time go by way faster. I was to take the late shift again, from 4 to 6 a.m., but I wasn't paired with Gabe. I had Emily, who was a good ranger but was in her 40s and was thinking to transfer soon. She wasn't someone I could easily talk to, but was still a nice person. I tried my best to get them sleep before my shift, but once night came, we all heard the screams. Again, they sounded distorted and infused with static. This chilled me to the bone since there were way more of these things out there. It sounded like a dozen or so, and they were all circling the station, just out of view of the spotlight. About every hour or so, we would hear shots fired, but nothing would come of it. 4 o'clock came and I had about 2 hours of sleep. I was exhausted, but the adrenaline and the situation was keeping me awake. Emily and I perched on top of the station, and Emily worked the spotlight. The light cut through the thick darkness and fog, providing a small beam of light in the dark void of the night. I was able to make out green eyes surrounding the station, but whenever the lights would shine in that direction, the creatures would fall back behind the dense trees that surrounded the station. About 7 minutes into my shift, and I saw a figure walk out from the trees about 50 yards away from the station. I aimed my machine gun at its center mass and had my finger ready to shoot when Emily shined the light on it to reveal that it was the junior ranger that went missing the day before. "There's no way," I screamed as I aimed my gun away. The junior ranger looked like he was dragged behind a horse for 3 miles. His limbs were all broken, his neck was twisted, and his head was bent at a 90-degree angle. "Rookie," I screamed, "are you okay? What happened?" He didn't say anything. He just stood there as if he didn't hear me. Emily screamed at me, telling me to shoot him and shoot him now. "I'm not gonna shoot him, he's hurt," I responded defiantly. "It's not him anymore, shoot him." I aimed down the sights to get a better look at him. The junior ranger had his mouth open as if he was about to say something. The sound of the horrific scream came out surprisingly at a loud volume. I was taken back by this and lost my aim for only a moment. I wasn't ready to shoot what looked like a fellow ranger. I aimed again and quickly unloaded my mag inside of him, each shot clearly hitting with bits and chunks flying off, but he just stood there. I reloaded and went to aim again when I saw he was gone. What was left behind was a small puddle of black oily substance that smelled like the spoiled meat from earlier. Screeching now began from the forest, and it got louder and louder. The creatures were a little bit more visible, but still unclear. They seemed unfazed by our firepower and were ready to make a move on our station. We called down to the rest of the station and told them that we were on high alert. Every person was armed in less than a minute, guarding an entryway of the station. We remained on top of the station, providing spotlight coverage for those below. We began to hear a mixture of screams from both the creatures and the rangers. It sounded as if the creatures were flanking on all sides and were trying to make it inside. More figures emerged from the forest, screeching while doing so. The sounds alone were enough to disorient and to terrify anyone that was nearby. The creatures were fast. It was almost as if our bullets were useless. Emily told me that all we had to do was to make it to sunrise and that we would be okay. At this rate things were going, I wasn't sure if that was possible. It sounded as if whatever those things were inside. There was still gunfire for the next 10 minutes or so. Then, there was an eerie silence that fell over the station. The rangers below had either ran out of bullets or, worse, the creatures had gotten them. Emily and I stayed on the roof, locking the only access point hatch, preventing anything from getting to us. We still had some ammo and our spotlight, but somehow the creatures were able to find a fuse box inside, and all the power to the station went out. We were stranded on top of the station in complete darkness, surrounded by shape-shifting creatures that wanted to kill us. All we could do was to remain as silent as possible, hoping that the creatures were either satisfied with the people below, or they just forgot about us up top. We could see them in the darkness, with their green glowing eyes walking around, some on all fours, others upright like a person. The screeching didn't stop until the sun came up a few hours later. We waited a few hours for good measure, before slowly descending into the horrors that laid waiting for us. Just like the other campsites from the days earlier, the station was destroyed. Blood and body parts were everywhere, but there was never a full body that we could recognize from the mess. They were either unidentifiable or they were missing. It was clear that the only people left alive in the forest was Emily and I. I went to radio in the company to tell them what had happened and called in reinforcements. They were there in record time and with a large convoy of people in hazmat suits and machine guns. We were questioned about the event that had happened the night before and we shared what we saw. They seemed not surprised at all and almost disappointed. The man interviewing us told us to follow him, so we did. We were able to follow him into a room, and he had us sign an incredibly long set of pages, saying that what we saw was intellectual property of the United States government, and that disclosing any information to anyone would result in the charge of treason, and most likely a death sentence. I signed the papers. I knew if I didn't, I would be shot right then and there. Why was the government trying to cover this up? What had happened in the forest those couple of nights? What were those creatures?